Hi, it's Anna. Welcome to part 4 of the Codependency Misdiagnosis series titled The Sovereign Path, Awakening from Dream Consciousness to Creator Consciousness. Over the last 3 episodes, we've been dismantling one of the most persistent and disempowering myths in modern psychology, the idea that empathic, high-functioning souls are codependent. In part 1, we trace the origins of that label and expose why it's a low-frequency misdiagnosis that collapses strong souls into shame instead of helping them rise into sovereignty. In part 2, we brought in the research of Dr. Sandra Brown to show that what gets mistaken for codependency is actually a set of soul-level super traits of empathy, loyalty, responsibility, attunement that become vulnerabilities when activated in the wrong relational field. And in part 3, we went deeper into the spiritual anatomy behind this pattern using the work of Rudolf Steiner, exploring how when we have too much in our heart and in the dream consciousness, without the balancing force of will, it creates a polarity imbalance that leaves empaths spiritually overextended and energetically exposed. And today in part 4, we bring all of this together. So this is where the path shifts from understanding the imbalance to correcting it and mastering it. A much more practical episode. So we can transition from dream consciousness to creator consciousness. From being more passive in our life, you could say from passive reaction to sovereign radiation, to commanding the field, which is essentially a move towards spiritual maturity. So this final episode is about moving from overgiving to right-giving, from spiritual amnesia to spiritual adulthood and maturity. It's about reclaiming the will, restoring inner authority, and stepping into the level of consciousness where you no longer attract predatory dynamics because your field actually no longer resonates with them. And if this series has brought you clarity, please feel free to share it with someone who you think may need it. So to start with, I'd like to recap this slide that I took you through last week, which is the anatomy of the empath from the work of Rudolf Steiner, and the concept of our heart being infused with that dream consciousness. What Steiner says actually is that we are living at a time when the mind is fully awake, the heart is semi-awake, and the will is completely underdeveloped. So when you look at it through the lens of these empathetic souls from the work of Dr. Sandra Brown, you can tell that the heart is semi-awake because it is infused with this dream consciousness, which is the esoteric mechanism behind the unconscious empath sponge phenomenon, the concept of rose-colored glasses. So it creates a sort of sleepwalking situation where your field is highly porous. There is no boundary between your personal aura and the surrounding environment. And it's still operating in this soft pre-individuality group soul state, unconsciously absorbing chaotic energies around you. And so you default to a state of instinctual unity. That's why maybe the concept of unity consciousness in spirituality appeals to you so much, where your field automatically breathes in the local atmosphere to harmonize it. And you're oblivious to the fact that you're even doing that you're even acting as this vacuum cleaner for everyone's unclean energy around you. It's something that happens completely unconsciously. And then you end up mistaking that energy as your own. And I mentioned last week as well that the dreaming heart literally cannot comprehend calculated, heartless evil. So it superimposes its own romanticized spiritual illusions over the abuser. So I want this episode to be a lot more practical. So how do we achieve that? How do we slowly remove those rose-colored glasses and come to a state of clarity and ensure that instead of looping horizontally, we truly rise vertically into connecting with soul, with spirit, and integrating that in our body? Like I mentioned last week, level 1 of personality is actually very important, but I view it more as building the foundation. So this is the type of inner work that everyone should start with, building this strong foundation of stabilization and emotional maturity, because we've all been raised in the same world, we, are often disconnected, exhausted, regardless of whether you've actually encountered a toxic and abusive relationship or just simply living in the world, right? In this rat race that we live in, where there is just so much overstimulation and disconnection that, this is the first step. This is why mindfulness is very important for anyone to reconnect. So this is the stage really where you start reconnecting with your soul. And that happens with reconnecting with your emotional body. So even trying to be able to sense what's happening inside of you and naming the emotions that are arising. A lot of us haven't been taught any of that. We haven't been modeled any of that. So we need to start at the basics. So learning to discern and sense, what's yours and not yours when you're around people and interacting with them. Learning relational and communication skills. This is a really important one. We all have some work to do there, right? And expressing ourselves and our needs and saying no. This is a really strong foundation that also allows not only to reconnect within and to stabilize your sense of self, especially obviously if you've been through an abusive relationship, but it's also a phase where there's some deprogramming that happens as well, trying to pay attention to what's happening in your mind, what sort of guilt programs get triggered in certain situations. It's really making room and space in our life to build this strong foundation. Everybody should be doing that. It's not so much as healing a wound, in my opinion. And it's a lot more about stabilizing our field, building a foundation and a strong sense of self, regardless of what's happened in your life. And then we move higher and higher, which is really a more accurate way of saying it, is that we actually move deeper and deeper within. So we move towards a stage of spiritual growth and becoming, which is really about going deeper into energetic boundaries, spending the time to attune to people's energy rather than their words. And, this is a slow process that happens in your life, and it's a day-by-day practice, actually. It's a slow process because you're building a muscle. Discernment is a muscle. Removing those rose-colored glasses happens through building that muscle of discernment. Another important part of that is taking full ownership of your path and choices, doing what needs to be done even when it hurts, choosing truth over comfort and social network, and more deprogramming. And, this path, like I said, takes time, it's progressive, and it's a path of spiritual growth and maturation and really liberation. And it requires a lot of effort, a lot of action, a lot of perseverance, a lot of patience, and a lot of determination. I can't stress that enough. Because you're not just healing a wound, you're literally growing spiritually, evolving, and building spiritual organs. I love the visual of the seed that must grow, through effort, through friction, through striving, through purification and refinement. You will grow into this amazingly beautiful tree, fully blossoming. So that's the goal of you being here on this planet and doing this work, to transform yourself, to bring spirit into your body. And you've reached this spiritual maturation, which is, the goal, if you can sense in yourself at some point that you can see reality exactly as it is. There's no longer any guilt programs, any triggers that happen. You can just stay with it and see it for what it is and be completely anchored within yourself. You reach a stage where you have zero tolerance for abuse or toxicity. You are only available for reciprocal relationships only. And that's actually felt viscerally inside your body. Like your body will viscerally reject anything else. And your field, your frequency becomes the boundary. So you're slowly evolving into a state where you no longer actually need to put those boundaries because you've done the work. You've done the work of putting those boundaries, and through that process, really activating a new frequency inside of you, which is really your spirit anchoring more and more inside of your body, so that you no longer have to do any of that. Your own field becomes a repellent for toxicity, and your own field is commanding. How I view the level 1 as well is that it's a clearing process. It's a purification of the mind and the heart, so that the will, the spiritual will, can come in. You're clearing the programs in your mind, the deep-seated beliefs that are blocking you. You're clearing the heart as well from that dream consciousness or any projection that you have to heal from as well, any defense mechanism, any of that stuff. And that process of clearing and purifying is actually what allows the spiritual will to fully come in, which will be felt as the fire in your gut. And I'm not talking about the solar plexus, that's personal will. I'm talking about a fire that's deeply felt in your lower gut. And that's because the power source of the spiritual will is completely different from the power source of the personal will. It comes from spirit. And so this is a process of shifting slowly from passive absorption to spiritual empowerment. And I'd like to offer some affirmations to help dismantle some deep-seated beliefs keeping you stuck. My feelings are valid even if others dislike them. Discomfort is not danger. Saying no is not cruelty. It's not my job to be a free psychologist for people. I can care without carrying. My life is directed by truth, not emotion. I do not abandon myself to keep the peace. My boundaries are non-negotiable when rooted in truth. Clarity requires courage, and my will is the guardian of my sensitivity. Like I've said, it's a slow process. It takes time, it takes practice, it takes self-observation and observing what's happening around you. And, really taking your time to dissect it all and to slowly shift. So how do we activate the spiritual will? I've identified 4 main categories. So the activation of clarity, which is really removing the remnants of that dream consciousness and breaking the cognitive dissonance so that you can fully see people exactly as they are and yourself. It goes both ways. You're no longer seeing people as wounded children, as potential, as fantasy. You see things exactly as they are. And you also see yourself exactly as you are. You can see when you're operating from that dream consciousness still or not. You can see when, you're shifting into defensiveness versus fully coming from a place of spiritual power. You can see the beautiful heart that you have, all those elevated traits, and your immense capacity to love as something to protect. There's also an activation of responsibility and accountability. So this is something that the souls with high elevated traits tend to have, but it's very important not to fall back into any sort of victimhood. And that's why I'm so sensitive to the sorts of labels that actually disempower us and try to shrink us instead of elevate us. And so we have to be very careful to never fall into victimhood. It's one thing to acknowledge what we've been through with clear sight, but victimhood is an entire thing altogether. And so taking full ownership of your path, your choices, your patterns, and your destiny is what needs to be fully activated as well. This is your path. Once you become aware of all this, this is your responsibility to do this. And we cannot blame anyone or anything when, sometimes we get it wrong. We have to pull ourselves back up and continue on this path. The activation of action, doing what needs to be done even when it hurts, even when you resist it. There's going to be a lot of resistance to let go of some deep-seated beliefs that are the soul level, the sort of identities that you've played for lifetimes. And it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt to let people go. And that's okay. It's a slow process, but you have to have that courage. You have to understand that nothing's gonna change in your life unless you activate that strong power and that strong ability to take action towards truth, no matter what. And the activation of boundaries as identity, like I've mentioned, it's not boundaries as rules or as step-by-step process to follow, but boundaries as energetic self-definition. It's your field that literally becomes a boundary. So you are in charge of all this clearing work, and it's important to take our time, but at the same time, it's important not to be complacent. Not to sit there doing nothing. There's always something we can be doing on this path. So you may not be able to leave that relationship right now, but there's plenty of inner work you can do or other action you can do to prepare yourself, to fortify yourself from within, to be able to take that action eventually. But there's also an intelligence behind taking our time here that I want to mention, is that I think at a soul level, we know that we don't want to do it the defensive way. We don't want to activate the personal willpower of defensiveness. We want to activate the spiritual willpower, which is very different. And so that's going to look like taking out your time actually and being measured in your approach and questioning yourself sometimes and making sure that you're not too rash in your decisions, and it's not about coming to a place where you block everyone that doesn't agree with you, you let go of everyone that doesn't agree with you. Like, that's not the powerful way. So there's an intelligence actually behind taking your time and being measured, which is different from being complacent. And so what we're doing here is coming to a place where your mind, heart, and will are purified and integrated as a whole. That's the goal. It's coming to a state where your mind sees clearly, your heart feels truthfully, and your will acts decisively without distortion, fantasy, or fear. And so the ultimate state is not, a passive, floaty, meditative state. It's not bypassing your responsibilities, ignoring your bills or drifting through life without structure, like it's very often portrayed online in the spiritual communities. That's not the true path, and that's not power. The true path is active will. It is clarity expressed through action and responsibility. It's a fierce, grounded execution of your spiritual maturity in daily life. And why the 75% of souls that Dr. Sandra Brown identified in her research with high elevated traits are so qualified to do this work at this time, it's because you have that in abundance. So you already have this sense of responsibility, this sense of accountability. But sometimes on this path, because what you're shifting and unearthing is just so strong and you resist it so much because it's embedded at a soul level, there's something that can happen where you start to shrink down and you start to become complacent and you don't want to do what needs to be done. And so these are all the things that you have to push through if you want to be truly successful on this path. And we're not coming to a state of emotional neutrality either. Like it's a heart that still feels very deeply, but it radiates instead of absorbing. It's really reaching a state where you operate from a strong core. I really like the analogy of the tree, actually, that's deeply rooted and no longer flapping in all directions with the wind. So this is the evolutionary shift that we are invited to take part in, especially if you identify yourself with the 75% of souls from part 2 of this Codependency Misdiagnosis series. We're moving from dream consciousness to creator consciousness. Like I said, creator consciousness is basically mind, heart, and will purified and aligned into an integrated whole. It is reaching spiritual maturity. So you've got dream consciousness on one hand, which is perceiving reality through feeling, fantasy, or this naive idealism of unity. And waking clear consciousness, which is perceiving reality exactly as it is without projection or romantic overlay. You're coming from a sponge state, which is absorbing the room, towards being a sun that radiates frequency and does not merge or absorb unconsciously. You're coming from a place of overgiving, which is instinctive and based on others' needs, to right giving, which is intentional, reciprocal, and rooted in truth and discernment. Going from spiritual amnesia, which is really about living unconsciously, through our patterns, our inherited belief systems, towards spiritual maturity, which is remembering your spiritual inner authority and acting from the higher self. From passive reaction, responding to external stimuli, to sovereign radiation. Your field becomes directive, coherent, non-negotiable. It's deeply felt within. It's a completely shift in the state of your very being, at the cellular level. From blurred energetic boundaries, the heart that's wide open, but that's unintegrated and porous and infused with that dream consciousness, to having a strong core. Like your heart actually is still wide open, but it is structured and integrated. From soft emotional love, which is about fusion, rescue, sentimental, and over tolerance, to true love rooted in truth and reciprocity, with clarity, respect, and mutual responsibility. So being an empath is not, a permanent condition of fragile vulnerability. I see it more as an unfinished power. It's simply a soul that's still running on that old dreamlike blueprint that hasn't yet forged its waking spiritual will, that hasn't really awakened its power, its spiritual power. Once you lose the rose-colored glasses and you can awaken your heart to reality, it stops acting like a sponge and starts acting like a sun. It radiates outward with such immense steady density that lower frequencies cannot infiltrate it. So you still perceive the suffering or the malice of others. Your capacity for empathy doesn't change, but you sit with a sharp waking state of clarity of the mind instead of interpreting that through rose-colored glasses. You see the toxic person exactly as they are, without any sentimental desire to fix, save, or excuse them. So empathetic souls tend to have a fear of this, right? They tend to have a fear of activating that power. And that's because, you haven't been modeled what true power looks like. You've been modeled toxic power and aggressive power, and you've been also experiencing yourself when you fall into that reactive defensive anger, that it doesn't feel good in your body. You don't like it. It costs you. It depletes you. And so that fear of that power is actually intelligence. That's another reframe that I'd like to offer. It's because at a soul level, I think you know that using the personal will to defend yourself, to put walls, to react, it's not the path. It's actually not true power. True sovereignty doesn't put walls built out of fear or out of a need to prove yourself or defend yourself or wanting to be right or all that stuff. It's not like that at all. True sovereignty is tapping into another power source, which is the spiritual will, which is actually power that comes directly from spirit, that is a protector. It's not defensive, it's protecting your heart. It's protecting that immense capacity to love, because you also don't want to fall into the trap of, having to remove that empathy and having to play games and become a different person because, it's been a weakness at time under the wrong relational fields. It's not like that. You retain that immense capacity to love and all those high elevated traits, because that's actually the most beautiful thing about you. But you slowly come to a place where you can actually, through purification, through removing the rose-colored glasses, through seeing others exactly as you are and your heart exactly as it is, you can actually tap into that spiritual willpower to bring in this strong protector that will allow you to keep your heart wide open in this world. Because once you can do this, and it will look like sometimes on the surface, once you express that in boundaries, it might look like the same as others who do it through personal willpower, but it's actually not the same. The energy behind it is so much more potent and so much more different. So the fear that you have about this power is actually an intelligence in a way, because you don't want to fall back and regress into putting those defensive barriers. You do want to remain open and retain this capacity for empathy and for love. So there's an intelligence behind that fear, because it's about finding the narrow path and finding that spiritual will. And it's also an intelligence about taking your time with it, because there are times where you might fall into that personal will, and it's going to be a process of attuning and sensing the difference in your body. Reactive anger is depleting. It's defensive. It's putting walls. It's seeing yourself as a victim to the world. Righteous anger is fierce. It's courageous. It's protective. It's knowing yourself, knowing your heart, and wanting to protect that. It's a very different energy. So what has been weaponized against you, this empathy that has been weaponized against you in the wrong relational fields, and that has cost you, it's an unfinished power. Your empathy is a powerful trait, but it needs the ignition of the spiritual will to protect that heart. Otherwise, you are just too open with no protector. So it's about activating that spiritual authority inside of you, and that acts as a density, as an anchor that shifts your field at a cellular level, actually, where you're no longer a sponge, but you become so embodied in your spirit that you radiate. So you actually stay completely open. But instead of absorbing things and processing it for people and not knowing what to do with it and being depleted in the process, the garbage that comes in is completely incinerated as it enters your field. This is the goal. This is where we're going to. But it also means that you realize that it's not your job to be a free garbage incinerator. And understanding that you have to step away from all these toxic dynamics to let people do their inner work, because that's the shadow of the empath. When we stay around these people, out of love, we actually buffer the very consequences and the very pain and the very inner void that they need to be feeling to even want to change anything. So there are a couple of mindset shifts that need to happen for us to be truly successful on this path of vertical ascension and connection with spirit. The first one is to purify our understanding of love. True love is not cuddling, rescuing, fixing, buffering people, holding their hand, cuddling, justifying, understanding. But that's how they are. That's just how they are. It's fine. True love is understanding that the most loving thing you can be doing is to actually remove these people from your life and from your inner circle. Because like I said, they need to be facing this inner void that you've been buffering them from feeling and facing their entire life. They need to be facing that. And there is a fear that, you think that people are going to suffer so much and hit rock bottom, but a lot of people don't learn from love, actually. Toxic people do not learn from love. They might always refuse to learn anything, and that's not your problem, right? But they might actually need to hit rock bottom to start even having an inkling of wanting to shift. The second mindset shift that I'd like to offer is that we need to stop looking at people as if they are wounded children, and we need to start seeing them as fully responsible adults. Because that's part of the problem, right? This wanting to rescue and fix and, overfunction is rooted in this, in seeing people as wounded children. And I view the very rife and popular narrative that we are all wounded children online as a really big problem, actually. We are not. Nothing excuses bad behavior. There are plenty of people who have gone through a lot of shit who don't turn into bad people, hurting others. So it's fully understanding that you're not looking at a wounded child, you're looking at a responsible adult that has to do their work. And this is how we move ourselves from spiritual innocence to spiritual maturity, which is the task of our time. And spiritual maturity is not ethereal. It is practical, earthly, self-reliance. It is seeing people exactly as they are. No more idealizing, no more rescuing. It is balanced responsibility, owning our side of the street only, choosing truth over fantasy, choosing discernment over projection, and no spiritual ego or bypassing. Truth must come before comfort, illusion, or sentiment. And so this is the shift towards awakening from dream consciousness to creator consciousness, to become a fully sovereign being who is no longer flapping like the wind, at the mercy of predators, because your field has now become an actual repellent for any toxicity. And it's realizing that you actually hold the key to the invisible cage holding you back. Nobody else does. You hold the key. If you can do this work of purification, of stabilization, of really looking at the deep-seated beliefs with a fine-tooth comb and observing slowly what's happening in your life, what's happening in your interactions, and doing this work, this is where you come to a place of clarity, coherence, and sovereignty. It's a path where you stop being shaped by relationships or the external reality, towards actually becoming a co-creator with your spirit, where you are shaping your own reality and you start attracting amazingly beautiful people in your life. This concludes this entire series. It's a call for souls who see themselves in the 75% of souls with high elevated traits in Sandra Brown's study to stop looping horizontally at the level of maintenance of the personality and to start rising vertically, towards the soul level and the spirit embodiment level. And to stop pathologizing your gold, to actually fully reject the over pathologizing culture that we live in. And to be very mindful and discerning of the professionals that you let guide you on this path as well. Because some of them cannot see you. They do not understand your gold. That's why they pathologize it. They see your giving as low self-worth when it's actually an abundance, because you have an abundance of giving energy. They see your profound humility as low self-worth and low self-esteem. They see your immense capacity to love and to hold space and to have patience and to want to collaborate and to be loyal as a pathology. And it's none of that. It's not a pathology. All of these traits are here to stay. It's the discernment that needs to be activated like a muscle that you slowly build, and the spiritual will that needs to be ignited. So you are not broken, you are not weak, you are not codependent. You are a strong soul with an incredibly loving heart who has been called through fire and pain to evolve into spiritual maturity. So what you went through was never a pathology. It was just an untapped power, a lack of spiritual will that left you prey in this world that preys on the uninitiated. And so at this time, in the age of Michael, the task is different. You've reached the stage of consciousness soul. The task now is not to continue to tolerate and to hold space and all of that stuff. Now your task is to ignite the spiritual will, to ignite that clarity and discernment. That's the next step for you. That's the next step of evolution. Not everyone is at this level. Not everyone is ready for this level. You are. In fact, it's the very fact that you hold this immense capacity for empathy and love that qualifies you for this work at this time. Because with great power comes great responsibility. The spiritual will is a raw, potent power that has to be passed through a purified heart. Your heart was never the problem, and your lack of discernment was never a moral failure. It's the beginning of your spiritual evolution. And your suffering is not for you to evolve, but you're so mature and intelligent that you take anything that comes your way and you turn it into strength, clarity, courage, and discernment. You use anything as fuel to do this vertical work. You don't need to suffer. Nobody needs to suffer to grow. But we can use whatever has happened to open our eyes wide to the reality that we share this planet with parasitical and predatory energies. And when you do that, it actually ignites that spiritual will as a potent fire, because you finally understand that you cannot stay into this state of dream consciousness and naive idealism. You have to protect your heart and you have to protect those high elevated traits. And once you can do that, it will be the best thing you've ever done. Evolving truly from this untapped power that was weaponized against you to this true sovereign power that allows you to keep a wide open heart. And you know what the great news is? Whatever you achieve in this lifetime, reclaiming your inner authority, developing this spiritual will organ, gaining this clarity, removing the rose-colored glasses once and for all, it stays with you for eternity. The work that we're doing, the spiritual work that we're doing in any lifetime stays with us. That's what makes this path so worth it. It stays with you on the other side after death too. It's a move towards more and more empowered, sovereign, individual spirit individuality. You're not just evolving the person that you are in this lifetime. At a spiritual level, you are gaining so much. And it's something that stays with you, that nobody can take away from you. Thanks for staying with me for this entire series. And if you find it helpful, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave me a like, leave me a comment. I'd love to hear about your experience as well. And feel free to share this to anyone who needs it. I'm on a mission to really dissect and make people discern the sort of labels that we let in our field. If you are resonating with the 75% souls from Dr. Sandra Brown's research, you do not have a lack of sense of self, a fractured ego. You have a lack of power. You have an untapped power, an unfinished power. So I hope this is helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.